Good morning, everyone. We are on Lamed Tes Amud Beis 39b1, top of first column of Od Amar Yehuda. So we've been discussing 2 days. So we've been discussing this notion of one kedusha, two kedushas when you have 2 days together. And then we're good. Thank you. What's it called? And then specifically, we focused on Rosh Hashanah. If you remember, Rosh Hashanah was unique in the sense that it's not your typical. So everyone agrees. Okay, Rosh Hashanah is unique in the sense that it is that there sometimes we'll even know that it is really supposed to be the first day of Yom Tov, but the witnesses come in too late, and nonetheless the rabbis will decree day 1 and day 2 are going to be Rosh Hashanah. You know, even if it's not necessarily coming out of a place of doubt. So Rosh Hashanah is a little bit unique in the sense that sometimes it's going to be one long day. It's going to be one long day, whereas when it comes to 2 days of Yom Tov, you don't really have it as one long day. It's more a matter of a situation of doubt, and therefore we treat both days as one holiday. We'll just keep that in mind, but let's go on. So Rabbi Yehuda, if you remember, we had a machlokes in our mission between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim about, do we treat Rosh Hashanah as one day, one long day, or do we treat it as 2 separate days, right? And Rabbi Yehuda said it is one long day, but he gives 3 different examples as to how that's expressed. Okay, one of them was with an Eruv. Excuse me, it's the opposite. Rabbi Yehuda wanted to say that it is 2 separate days. Excuse me, I apologize. Rabbi Yehuda said Rosh Hashanah is 2 separate days, and he expressed that in 3 different examples. One example he gave was the case of the Eruv. I'm going to place the Eruv on the right side of the city. I'm going to place the Eruv for day 1, and I'm going to place the Eruv on the left side for day 2. That's fine, he says. Why? Because it's 2 separate days. On day 1, it's going to go in this direction. Day 2, it's going to go in that direction. No problem. The other example he gave was the basket case. Was the case where you have tevel, you have food which is untied, you have 2 baskets in front of you. And he says, and we're going to see the exact example, but basically some stipulation which allows him to eat the food by the 2nd day. And then the 3rd example was the case of an egg that was laid, that by day 2, he's going to be allowed to eat the egg, right? If it's one long, and the Chum don't agree with him on any of these cases, because the Chum say it's one long day. None of these things would work within one Shabbos afternoon, with one Shabbos day. Similarly, they want to work over here because they treat Rosh Hashanah as one day. Now we're going to go into understand why, if Rabbi Yehuda wanted to just simply say they are 2 separate days, why does he give 3 examples? Okay, that's what the Gemara is going to be dealing with. So, Odam Rabbi Yehuda, Tzricha, we need the 3 different examples. Diashmin and Rosh Hashanah, had he only taught the case of the Eruv for Rosh Hashanah, Bahakam Rabbi Yehuda, Mishum Telo Ka'avid Midi, because he's not doing anything on Yom Tov itself. In other words, to make these 2 Eruvin, what he does is on Erev Rosh Hashanah, he goes ahead and sets an Erev up on the east side and an Erev up on the west side, and he makes a stipulation on Rosh Hashanah. We don't see him doing any actions, and therefore there's no concern. Let's see what the concern would be. In the case of the baskets, it looks like he is rectifying tevel. In other words, in the case of the 2 baskets, what happens is he says, if today is Rosh Hashanah, then nothing. If tomorrow's Rosh Hashanah, then this basket is the Truma and the Meiser, etc., and this basket is now going to be okay. So he's doing something on Yom Tov. He's doing something Rosh Hashanah, even though it's with a stipulation, but you, the onlooker, might see this and say, hey, you're allowed to tithe, you're allowed to separate Shumas and Maestros on Rosh Hashanah, which you're not allowed to do. The only reason he's allowed to do it in this case is because he's doing it based on a stipulation, right? In other words, again, what he's saying is on day 1 of Rosh Hashanah, he says, if today is Rosh Hashanah, then I'm not doing anything. If tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah, then today I'm separating, that I'm making this basket the Trumos, and this basket is therefore okay, right? And then tomorrow he does the same stipulation, right? So each day he is doing this stipulation where he's separating the Trumas and Maestros, but and that is something that on Yom Tov day itself, if you were to go ahead and do the same exact thing on Yom Tov, that'd be Asur. You're not allowed to separate Trumas and Maestros on Yom Tov. The rabbinic decree, you're basically being misakin money. You're fixing something on Yom Tov, and therefore you're not allowed to do so. So we're saying Rabbi Yehuda, in the case of the Eruv, where he's not doing anything on Yom Tov, there he said, okay, no problem. We treat it as 2 separate days. But in the case of the baskets, even though he holds it's 2 separate days, but maybe he might agree with the Rabbanan that since it could be, people will see this and come to going ahead and separating Trumas and Maestros on a regular Yom Tov. They watch him do this. Hey, look, you're allowed to separate Trumas and Maestros on Yom Tov. Now, really, in this particular case, he's not separating it for today. He's saying, if today is not Rosh Hashanah, then I'm separating Truma. If tomorrow says, if today is not Rosh Hashanah, I'm separating Trumas and Maestros. But a person watching this say, look, you're allowed to separate Trumas and Maestros on Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that really it's 2 days, might still say it's forbidden because of the potential confusion. Okay? And if you only taught those 2 cases, Mishum Telekal and Migzar Alayhu, there's no grounds for a a decree because there's nothing biblical that it could lead to. In other words, even separating Trumas and Maasros on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, that is rabbinically prohibited. There's no biblical prohibition. Aval Beitza, in the egg case, the Ikal Migzarba, there is a concern that it's going to lead to a biblical violation. What is that? Mishum Peros Anoshrin, either because of fruits that fall on Yom, similar to the fruit that fall on Yom Tov. In other words, like this, there is a rabbinic decree that you're not allowed to go ahead and and benefit from. Let's say you have an apple tree in your backyard and the apples fall down on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to benefit from it. Why not? What did you do? You didn't do anything wrong. The problem is that it might lead you to going and separating apples from your tree, which is a biblical prohibition. Okay, so this might be the reason why the egg case, you would not be allowed, you would agree in the egg case, since it could lead to a biblical prohibition, that just like in the case of the fruit that fall from a tree, we don't allow you to benefit from it because it might lead you to break it off. An egg is in some ways, conceptually, is similar to a fruit that fell from a tree, and in as much as you're able to have an egg, which is something which separated from its source, you might go ahead and think, oh, I can separate things from their source, and I might come to separate a fruit from the tree, or because it's similar enough to juices which issued from a fruit on Yom Tov. Okay, so there's a prohibition against squeezing fruit on Shabbos. Not so well known, but you're not allowed to go. People take a lemon, let's say. So there we have very specific parameters of when you're allowed to squeeze a lemon. You're only allowed to. You're not allowed to squeeze it into a cup. You can't make lemonade in a regular fashion, just squeezing lemons or squeezing oranges, making a liquid. You would not be allowed to do that. There are particular cases where if you squeeze it directly into a solid, then you'd be allowed to do so. So you're allowed to squeeze it into a fish. Discussion about if you do it into a salad, whatever. But the bottom line is to squeeze it into something. Why are you not allowed to squeeze it? So that's a biblical prohibition of taking something liquid out of something, taking something out of something. So similarly, if we allow you to take an egg on Yom Tov, it's something out of something. It's something which is like, the idea is there's juices which are trapped in the lemon and you're taking it out. So if we allow that, it might come to say, well, I'm allowed to go ahead and take juices out of a regular liquid. I'm allowed to squeeze a lemon, and that would be asur. And therefore, for those reasons, since they could lead to biblical prohibitions, ema modelu rabbanan. Therefore, maybe in those cases, Rabbi Yehuda would agree. Tzricha. Therefore, we need all three cases. Rabbi Yehuda says definitively, no, or rather, yes. In other words, he says, I'm not afraid of any decrees, not rabbinic decrees, not biblical, not because of biblical decrees. I treat the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah as two separate days entirely, and therefore, both in the case of Eruv, permitted. In the case of the baskets, it's 2 separate days, permitted. In the case of the egg, permitted. I'm not going to make any decrees. I treat it as 2 separate days, but we needed all 3 cases because based on these considerations, we could hear that he may have been stringent. Okay, fine. Says the Gemara further. Tanya. Ketzad Amar Rabbi Yehuda. What is the case with the 2 baskets? So Masna goes like this. Masna Adam Lakal B'Yom Tov Rishon. A person could go ahead and stipulate a condition concerning a basket on the first day of Yom Tov, v'ochla b'sheni, eat it on the second day. How does it work? What is the procedure? Haylo of shtei kakol shel tevel. Person has 2 baskets of tevel. Okay, what is tevel? Tevel is food which you did not take any trumos or maasros from. Okay, so back in ancient, in biblical times or post-biblical times, but basically in time or even today, but basically someone after you harvest your food, the food is called tevel. First stage is tevel. It is forbidden to eat that food because you did not take your trumos and maasros. That is called tevel. So back in the day, you'd go to the store, you'd buy the food. They wouldn't have the badat tevel. You separate trumos and maasros. You go to the store, you buy tevel, or you take it from your backyard. You have tevel. So the first thing you have to do is separate trumos and maasros. Okay. So you have 2 baskets. They're both filled with tevel. Okay, so you went to your backyard and you have a fig tree or whatever, and you harvested all your figs. You have 2 baskets of figs now. Okay, you can't eat them. Okay, and it's Rosh Hashanah. You want to eat them. So what do? So he says like this. So Omer, you say, this according to Rabbi Yehuda holds are really 2 separate days, and one of them is completely weekday, and one of them is holy. Right, as opposed to the Rabbanan to say they're both holy. Rabbi Yehuda says one is weekday, one is holy. We just don't know which one is which. So how do you do this? So Omer im hayom chol u'machar kodesh. If today is an ordinary day and tomorrow is sacred, then tehezo truma alzo. Then you say this basket, the food in this basket is going to be the truma. And for the remaining food for the other food, the tevel in this basket. And what does that allow for? What that allows for is now I've been mafresh my truma. Right? Again, I have 2 baskets, they're both tevel. I say this basket full of truma. Point, I take it away, I'm going to give it to the Kohen, and now the rest of the food that's remaining is food that I'm allowed to eat. However, that's only if today is weekday, in which case to be allowed to be mafresh truma. But if today is indeed the Rosh Hashanah day, and tomorrow's the ordinary day, and midvarei klum, then my saying is meaningless. In other words, I don't want to be in violation of the rabbinic decree of separating on Yom Tov. So therefore, if today is Rosh Hashanah, then this basket is truma. This basket is now edible. It's now kosher. But if today is not Rosh Hashanah, Sorry. That's if today's not Rosh Hashanah. If today is Rosh Hashanah, then the words that just came out of my mouth are null and void. I don't want them to be doing anything because I don't want to be in violation of the rabbinic decree. Okay. However, Vikora Lav Shem Amanicha. Okay, in doing so, he designates the produce as truma, and then he leaves it until the second day. Ulamachar Omer, on the second day, he says like this: Ima Yom Chol. If today is an ordinary day, say Zo Truma Al Zo, then this should be truma for this produce. Yom Kodesh, if today is sacred, and tomorrow and yesterday was the Chol day, the weekday. Again, my words have no consequence. Vikara La Shem Ba'ochla, and therefore, one way or another, either through yesterday and today, now one of these baskets is truma, and now it has the shame truma, it has the name of truma, and now I'm allowed to eat the other baskets. Okay, that's the case that Rav Yehuda is allowing, because he treats the 2 days as one day is definitely holy, one day is definitely weekday. We just don't know which one is which, and therefore the stipulated separation of truma works. Rav Yossi Oser. Rav Yossi does not allow this. Rav Yossi treats the days of Rosh Hashanah as a single day, and therefore I can't go ahead and do this because they're both holy. It's not that one day is weekday, one day is holy. They're both holy. Okay, then the last words, as we'll have to unpack a little bit more. V'chein haya Rav Yossi oser b'shnei yamim tovim shel galio. Similarly, Rav Yossi would prohibit this even on 2 days of Yom Tiv in the diaspora. Now, this is a little bit more complicated because Rav Yossi to disagree on one day on Rosh Hashanah, that makes sense because Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Hashanah, we understand that we saw from based on the way that Beis Din sanctified Rosh Hashanah, we could treat it as one long day, one long holiness. But everyone knows, Pesach, April, whatever, 12th and 13th, now we treat it as both holy. I'm not saying you should go ahead and treat it, but everyone agrees it's misafik. Everyone agrees that one day is indeed the holy day, and one day is theoretically a weekday, right? So it's a little strange. So the statement over here is a little strange, which the Gemara is going to address in a moment. Rav Yossi says on Rosh Hashanah you can't do this. Makes sense. You can't do one day this, one day that, because he holds, as opposed to Rav Yehuda holds one day's weekday, one day's holy, and you're just not sure which one is which. Rav Yossi says no, it's one long day, and therefore they're both holy. But then he says, and the same prohibition, I will not allow this to happen on 2 days of Pesach. That's a little harder, because there, no one holds that Pesach is one long holy day. So we'll have to come back to Rav Yossi's statement about that. But first, let's see a little bit of a story, and it's going to bring us back to this. So, Hu bar Tavia de Asla Veresh Galusa. A deer was brought to the home of the Reish Galusa. The Itzid B'Yom Tov Rishon Shel Galias. It was captured on the first day of Yom Tiv. So they're in Bavel, and some non-Jews go ahead and capture a deer. Now, it's Yom Tiv. Are you allowed to capture a deer on Yom Tiv? For food. So yes or no? No, sorry. What's it called? Sorry, trick question. But so you're right. You're allowed to do things for food, but there's a very important principle which plays a very important role, and that is you're allowed to do things for food that could not have been done the day before, or that would have made a difference the taste the day before. So therefore, I'm allowed to bake something on Yom Tiv, because does food taste better that was baked today, bread that was baked today that I eat today, or bread that was baked yesterday? 100%, right? I can't make, for example, Jell-O today, right? Why? Because Jell-O tastes the same if it was made yesterday as it was made today. 98% of foods taste better if they're made today, and therefore I could bake them, etc., etc. The reason I'm not allowed to, people don't know this, the reason I'm not allowed to start a new fire on Yom Tov, why not? I'm putting my oven on. Why can't I start a new fire? Right? The reason is because for the sake of starting a new fire, there's no difference if my pilot light or whatever my oven was on. Yeah, in terms of the quality of the food, does it make a difference if it was done yesterday or today? Not at the slightest. Same thing, right? So So anything that I could have done yesterday and it would make no difference, I'm not allowed to do today. Anything where it enhances it, I'm allowed to do today. Right? So that's why I'm allowed to cook. But again, the few foods. You can't make Jell-O. Again, I don't know. Sorry, how many people... sorry, I'm not trying to pick out Jell-O. Okay, yeah, I'm just using it as an example of 98... There's almost no foods that don't taste better fresh than not. I'm just using Jell-O. Jell-O is like the classic example I'm aware of, that like it really makes no difference. There's no such thing as like, oh, it was spoiled because it was made yesterday. It wasn't as good because it was made yesterday. It's like literally the same thing. But 98% of foods I'm allowed to make today. But again, starting a fire that was put on, if my element was put on yesterday or put on today, would it make a difference to food? Of course not. So that's why it's usher. It's forbidden for me to turn on the fire on Shabbos, on Yom Tiv, because I could have done it yesterday. So similarly, capturing the animal, slaughtering the animal, 100%. It's fresh meat. Apparently tastes good. None of us have ever tasted it because it takes a while for us, whatever. But fresh meat is certainly just like fresh food, tastes better. Fine. But capturing it, you could have captured it yesterday, right? So the non-Jews captured it on the first day of Yom Tiv, and they slaughtered it on the second day of Yom Tiv. Okay? So again, 2 days of Yom Tov, it's Pesach. And the Reish Galusa, he's the big cheese, like he's the big important guy. And some guy comes along, some non-Jews come along, and for the sake of the Reish Galusa, they capture a deer on day 1. Okay, something which a Jew would not be allowed to do. And on day 2, a Jew slaughters it. Okay, so Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda achlu, and then they served it. Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda ate the meat. Rav Sheshes lo achal. Rav Sheshes did not eat it. Okay, so Amar Rav Nachman. So what's going on over here? So Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda eating it. Why are they eating it? They're saying, listen, even though the non-Jew is not supposed to be capturing it on day 1, the bottom line is it's a separate day. And one of these days was holy, one of these days was not. So let's say even if yesterday was holy when they did something wrong, today it's day 2. And therefore today would be, if yesterday was holy, then today would be weekday. And therefore I'd be allowed to eat it, right? And if yesterday was weekday and today's holy, I'm also allowed to eat it, no problem. So they're holding very clearly it's a suffix. Was yesterday the holy day? Was today the holy day? And therefore, since it was captured yesterday and it was slaughtered today, there's no problem eating it. So Rav Sheshes, though, seems to hold that these 2 days are one continuous period of holiness, and therefore he says it's one long day. And therefore, yesterday's capturing is going to impact my today because he treats it as one long day. You with me? Yeah? So, says Rav Nachman. I'm Rav Nachman, my avid leil Rav Sheshes. What am I going to do with Rav Sheshes? Who's not eating the venison, who's not eating this meat. Amar le Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes responds to Rav Nachman. Ve'echi achol. How could I eat it? Tani isi v'amri la isi tani. Okay, isi tat or isi tat. I'm not sure what the difference is between these two versions, but what is isi tat? Ve'chein har Yosi oser shnei yam tom shel galios. The quote that we just had above, there of Yosi would, just like Rav Yossi did not allow the Trumos and Maestros to be separated one day to the next on Rosh Hashanah, he also did not allow that on Yom Tiv. So we see Rav Yossi, in as much as he treats Rosh Hashanah as one day of Yom Tiv, he seemingly is treating all, 2 days of Pesach as one Yom Tiv, or 2 days of Shavuos as one Yom Tiv, right? So that's why he's saying, I'm not going to eat it, because Rav Yossi prohibits and treats the 2 days of Yom Tiv as one day. Now, as we pointed out, it doesn't make sense, right? Rosh Hashanah, one day, we understand. But he doesn't. But we're not still yet sure why Rav Yossi does this. But Rav Sheshes is saying the reason I'm not eating the venison is because yesterday and today are treated as one long day according to Rav Yossi. Just like he treats Rosh Hashanah as one long day, he treats the 2 days of Pesach and the 2 days of Shavuos, 2 days of Sukkot as one long day. Okay, so now the Gemara suggests that maybe we misunderstood Rav Yossi, and therefore is trying to, because Rav Sheshes is saying, hey, listen, we have a question over here from Rav Yossi, so we're going to see 2 possible answers as to why Rav Yossi should not be a question, and therefore Rav Sheshes really should be eating. So Amar Rava, Umay Kusha, what difficulty does this brayso pose? Dilma Hachika Amar. Maybe this is what Rav Yossi was actually saying. V'chein ha Rav Yossi oser. Rav Yossi prohibits this. Designating truma b'shnei yom tovim shel Rosh Hashanah bagola. Not that he's saying he's extending it to all Yom Tovim, that whenever you have a 2-day Yom Tov, but rather he's extending it to Rosh Hashanah in the diaspora. In other words, outside of Israel, the Chutz La'aretz, he's saying there too, right? And in other words, there too, this procedure of making the Trumas and Maestros on one day and the other day is going to be problematic according to Rav Yossi as well. What he means is as follows. In other words, you may have thought that when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, it's only in Israel that we treat them as one long day. Outside of Israel, we treat it as a suffix, just like you treat every Pesach as a suffix. You treat every Rosh Hashanah as a suffix. Kamash Malan, Rav Yossi is coming to say no. In as much as in Israel, we treat, or even in Yerushalayim, we treat the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah as one long day because of the whole complication we spoke about before. And sometimes the Beis Din itself says today is holy and tomorrow is holy. Similarly, outside of Israel, all Rosh Hashanahs are going to be seen as one long day. But all other Yom Tovim, we're not going to treat as one long day. And if we read it this way, now Rav Sheshes is actually incorrect because Rav Sheshes, misunderstood Rav Asi. Rav Asi is actually saying only Rosh Hashanah is both in Israel as well as outside of Israel, are treated as one long day, which, by the way we treat it conceptually. That's why we have, again, the special fruits on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, because we treat it as one long day. When it comes to Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, there we'll treat it as 2 separate days, and therefore, if Sheshes really could have eaten the meat, and therefore this brayso is not really a question on the practice of Rav Nachman and who was it with him? Rav Chisda. Okay, ask the Gemara, Hachi shel Galios. The terminology is a little bit off. It shouldn't have said Yom shel Galios of the diaspora. It should have said Bagola Mibaile, in the diaspora. In other words, if the point was to say that in as much as Rosh Hashanah in Israel is going to be one long day, so too Yom Tov, so too Rosh Hashanah in the diaspora is going to be one long day, it should have said Bagola. Instead of, by the fact that it said Shel Galios, it just sounds like he's extending it to all Yom Tovim, and therefore the Gemara doesn't like Rava's answer. So Rav Asi is going to give another answer. Rav Asi, Umay Kusha, what's the question? Maybe this is what Rav Yossi was saying. V'chein harav Yossi osa isr shnei Yom Tovim Shel Galios, kishnei Yom Tovim Shel Rosh Hashanah lirabanan desharu. It's a very interesting read, but it's a logical read. The way Rav Asi's reading Rav Yossi is to say that Rav Yossi would agree to the Rabbanan, in as much as the Rabbanan treat Rosh Hashanah as two separate days, okay, he would agree that as much as they treat Rosh Hashanah as two separate days, he agrees when it comes to other Yom Tovim that he treats it as two separate days. Right? In other words, what's happening over here is that we're flipping it. Until now, the simple read was Rav Yossi was saying that in as much as Rosh Hashanah was one day, so too all Yom Tovim. But now we're saying no. In as much as Rosh Hashanah was 2 days, according to the Rabbanan, not me, according to the Rabbanan, according to Rav Yehuda, says it's 2 separate days. In as much as they hold as 2 separate days, I would agree it's 2 separate days when it comes to other Yom Tovim. And now the way we're reading Rav Yossi is actually saying the exact opposite. Rav Yossi is saying, when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, we treat it as one Yom Tov, and therefore you can't separate the Truma one day to the next. When it comes to other Yom Tovim, I agree to you it's 2 separate days. Okay? Fine. Ashkechei Rav Sheshas, Rav Shmuel. Rav Sheshas met Rav Shmuel Amrlei, and he asked him, Tani Mar Midi B'Kedushos, do you know any teachings, any brisos regarding the periods of holiness when it comes to the 2 days of Yom Tov, meaning Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, outside of Israel? Amrlei Tanina, I'll teach you a brisa. Mod Rav Yossi B'Shnei Yom Tov Mishal Galios. Here it says explicitly, Rav Yossi agrees regarding the 2 days of Yom Tov, that they're 2 separate holinesses. Right, so now we have explicitly that Rav Yossi, the same one who said the Rosh Hashanah is one long day, when it comes to Yom Tov, when it comes to Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, he treats it as 2 separate days. And therefore, this, by the way, this doesn't fit very nicely with Rav Sheshas. Again, let's go back to the case of the deer. It was on Pesach morning. Let's just give it Shavuos or Sukkot, and they caught the deer on day 1, and they're serving it on day 2. So Rav Sheshas, I can't have it because Rav Yossi disagreed. But we weren't sure exactly what Rav Yossi was saying, and now we have a brayso explicitly saying Rav Sheshas would only say this by Rosh Hashanah. He does not say by Pesach. So Rav Sheshas really could have had the meat. So listen to Rav Sheshas says. The Gemara has no problem humanizing our sages. Amalei Rav Sheshas says Rav Shmuel to Rav Shmuel, if you meet Rav Nachman or Rav Chisda, lo tema lehov lo midi. Don't tell him about this brayso. Don't tell him about this brayso. I don't want to look bad. Again, he didn't do anything asur. He abstained from eating it. But he abstained from eating it because he had a bad interpretation of the Mishnah. And had he known this brayso, he would have been able to eat it. He's embarrassed. He says, don't tell him this brayso. I don't want to be embarrassed. Okay, the Gemara said too bad. The Gemara said too bad. We're all going to know about it for the rest of eternity. Okay, fine. Amar Avashi. Let's go a little bit further. One more version. Let's Amar Li. Maimar told me personally, Ahubar Tavia, that the deer, in other words, he has a different version of the whole case. That deer, Lavi Tude it wasn't captured. Rather, it was the non-Jew. It wasn't captured on the first day of Yom Tov. Rather, the non-Jews brought it from outside the Tchum. Okay, so basically, again, we know that Tchum applies on Yom Tov. We're at the top of 48.1. The halach of Tchum applies on Yom Tov, not just Shabbos, right? So most Eruv halachos don't apply on Yom Tov, meaning I'm allowed to carry on Yom Tov, but I'm not allowed to go beyond the Tchum on Yom Tov. And the case was, on the first day of, let's say, Pesach, the non-Jews brought it from outside the Tchum for the Reish Galusa. So Manta Achal Savar, so Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda were eating it, told, Hacha Bishvel Yisrael Zeh, Mutter Yisrael Acher. So Ababi Yisrael Yisrael Zeh, Mutter Yisrael Acher. So Umanza Lo Achal Savar, called Asli Verish Galusa, Daiti Dechulu Rabbananasi. So there's, generally speaking, when it comes to Amir La'akum, a non-Jew doing something, even if you don't tell a non-Jew to do something for you, not so well known, if non-Jew, you know he's for a fact he's doing it for you, you can't benefit. In other words, if I'm sitting in this room in the dark on Friday night, and Dennis were to walk in, or Janet were to walk in and say, oh, Rabbi, sit in the dark, or whatever he's saying in Spanish, and he'd open the lights, right, I'd have to leave the room. Because even though I didn't ask him, he's doing it for me, right? But let's say he did it for me, I leave, and then you walk in, right? So when it's rabbinic, I'm actually allowed to benefit. Because he did it for me, he didn't do it for you. And therefore, you're allowed to walk in and benefit. So the ones who eat it...
Then you're allowed to stay in?
I'm not allowed to stay because he did it for me. I got to leave. I can't go back. Okay. But you could come in and benefit because he did it for me. So that's for rabbinic laws. And so therefore, those who ate it, Rav Nachman Sheshas ate it because, ate it because he said, since it was brought for the Reish Galusa, that's not me, and therefore I'm allowed to eat it. However, Rav Sheshas did not eat it because he said the reason I'm not going to eat it is because of the fact that when you bring it for the Reish Galusa would support the rabbis. And therefore, even though he didn't bring explicitly for me, he ultimately brought it for me. Ask the Gemara, Rav Sheshas, the Rabbi Rav Shmuel of Amalei. We had that whole dialogue, which really seemed it was really about the 2 days holiness, 1 day holiness, and the way you're explaining it, it's all taking place on the same day. So it says Rav Ashi, Lo Hayad Var Me'olam. That story, that embarrassing story of Rav Sheshas, where he said, oh, don't tell anyone, it actually never happened. And therefore, okay, so at least we save Rav Sheshas' dignity. And according to this version of Rav Ashi, that story never happened. Have a wonderful day.